for being here. I have so much to say about young people in the pandemic, but I thought to kind of just keep it simple and have a discussion, I'm going to just share where young people are at right now, generally speaking. And then we could talk about some possible solutions. And I just want to just quickly share that I run the Chicano Studies Research Center. It's been around over 50 years, and we're partnering with LPPI on the Latina Futures Project. It's a Latina Futures Lab, and we're looking at a lot of our work through a gender lens. And so some of the findings I'm going to share today focus on young Latinas. All right, so I want to remind you what our young population looks like, because sometimes we can't tell what the demographics are looking like because we're not often on the news. So here in California, Latinx, Latinas, Latinos, young people comprise almost half the population. We're at around 46%. So it's a huge population. Whatever happens to young Latinos will shape the future of the state. We cannot forget that. And one thing to recognize is that 83% are U.S. citizens, mostly U.S. born, but we do have some naturalized immigrants. And so we have, when we look at the Latino population, we not only have to look at them through a gender lens, but we also have to think about our non-citizen population because they're experiencing some of the greatest impacts of the pandemic. All right. So I just want to share some stats about the low-income status of Latinos versus non-Latinos. And as we know, there's a gendered pattern. The people who are least likely to be low income are non-Latino males, followed by non-Latina women. And of course, this is a diverse group. But in general, Latinos are still suffering, continue to suffer economic inequality. Males are, about a third of young males are considered low income, meaning that their income is less than 200% of the poverty line. Latinas are more likely to be low income, especially if they're non-citizens. So we do see a lot of Latinas, especially more than Latina immigrants who are not citizens, experiencing high levels of poverty. And we cannot forget that. We cannot forget that there's a gender dynamic, a citizenship dynamic to the economic distress, inequality in healthcare access. So non-Latinos are more likely to have healthcare, while Latino males, about 1 in 5 do not have healthcare. This is between the age of 18 to 34. And we have to think about how we need to reach these young people to make sure that they access healthcare. Latina women are more likely to have healthcare when compared to their male counterparts. However, if they're not citizens, once again, we see them not accessing healthcare. So these are just general patterns we have to keep in mind when thinking about policy. Okay, moving on. One thing that may not be of surprise is that young Latinos are in the workforce. They're working. Disproportionately in low-wage, non-unionized jobs. So we have to think about how those low-wage jobs can become better jobs. And there's opportunities here in the state of California. You know, we do have a strong labor movement, and young people are increasingly becoming interested in joining labor unions or fighting for better working conditions. So even though we have high employment rates, what we do see is significant inequalities in school enrollment. So now we're looking at 18 to 24-year-olds. This is college-age young people. Non-Latino males and non-Latino females are enrolling at fairly high rates, very similar to pre-pandemic levels. However, when we're looking at Latinos in the States, less than 1 in 5 Latino males are in some kind of educational program. That's really, really low, especially if you compare these two. I mean, non-Latino males are more than twice as likely to be in some post-secondary program. That's extreme. Latina females are doing a better off a little bit, but what we do know is that they're foregoing attending a four-year prestigious university, and they're disproportionately enrolling in community colleges, even though they're qualified to be UC system. So we see a lot of Latinas who are have been well prepared academically, enrolling in the community college, and the transfer rates are low.
And this is a race for folks who have graduated, right? Not capturing those who started the track system but didn't end up finishing for whatever reason.
This is just in general. The ones that may not have finished tend to be the non-citizens, and their four-year enrollment rates are extremely low at 12%. But we do see that young women, if they finish high school, they tend to disproportionately enroll in community college. And I have a survey out in the field right now that is suggesting that these community college student young women are disproportionately caring for senior citizens and young people. So 1 in 3 community college students is caring for their abuelitos, their sister's kids, sometimes their own kids, but it's usually not their own kids. And so what I've been saying is that these young Latina college students are the new safety net. And they're foregoing career and college opportunities, and they're trying to take that 1 or 2 classes while taking care of kids, and they're really struggling. So, you know, once I have those survey data, survey data finalized, I really want to share these results, because we're not going to see this young cohort of Gen Z young women go to four-year and complete four-year college, four-year universities at the same rate as their predecessors, who maybe were born 4 years earlier, just because the pandemic really did a number of them. And I feel like we're going back 50 years where, like, if you're a young Latina, you're taking care of kids or your elders rather than pursuing your own degree. All right, so this is sobering news, but I'm going to share some more not so good news and then some promising news. I'll end on a positive note. So some of my work looks at young people's civic engagement, and I've been tracking voter patterns, young voter patterns for a while. And Latinos were starting to catch up and starting to turn out at higher rates prior to the pandemic, but we saw a dip. And so in the last midterm election cycle, about 39% of non-Latinx registered voters turned out at the polls, whereas just over a fifth of Latinx youth. This is pretty low. I mean, this is our democracy right here. So we've got to think about what's going on here, and I have some thoughts about this. Let's see. So if we look at our Latino young electorate, ages 18 to 34, about 44%, they comprise about 44%, 45% of US citizens in California. And they're registering now at pretty high rates. So interventions that are unique to California are making a difference in making sure that young people are registering. But being registered doesn't mean that you turn out to vote. And so there's a lot that we could be doing to ensure that this turnout rate becomes more representative of the population. And so I have some solutions. So thanks to the support of the California Endowment, Irvine Foundation, I've been looking at young voter mobilization efforts and peer-to-peer outreach efforts to get out the vote. And as part of this, I started out, I worked at UC Merced and UC Santa Cruz to really focus on the Central Valley. So I trained students to go out and join nonpartisan voter mobilization efforts and figure out what works. And in those efforts, what we really learned is that young people get excited about voting when they learn about what's going on locally. What's going on in places like Avenel, Coachella, Visalia, Stockton. When they understand how their vote could make a difference, and that sometimes it only takes 1,000, 2,000, maybe sometimes 3,000 votes to make a difference at the local level. And so in 2018, we saw a huge jump in voter turnout in the Central Valley as a result of these voter education and voter mobilization efforts, and I did an experiment to prove that, so I feel pretty confident in what I'm saying. And so the key takeaway message is that when young people reach out to their peers and explain to them why voting matters, their rights to vote, and when it explains to them that it's okay, you can vote, even if your parents are not citizens, because there's a lot of disinformation out there. People are afraid to register to vote or vote because they have family members who are undocumented. When those myths get dispelled, it makes a difference in turnout. So I continue to do this work. I started out in the Central Valley in 2018. In 2022, we did a less concentrated effort and trained UC students to work alongside community college students and high school students to do voter education and outreach. And it did make a difference in places like Delano, in Calexico, in communities where the students were working alongside their peers to get out the vote. And so, this is work I do, but this is work that could be done across the state, where high school students, community college students can be trained on voter outreach efforts and really be the messengers to the community. And what we've also learned is that when you have this community of UC students or community college students or high school students, it really strengthens the pipeline and the link between communities like Avenal or Delano or Rich Grove and college systems. And so having those links of college students going back to their home communities can really make a difference. And so I'm hopeful as long as there's interventions that target young people in our communities, Latino communities, low-income Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, because we do know that they make a difference. And we saw that prior to the pandemic. I know the California Endowment invested in a lot of efforts that did transform the lives of young people. And so it's possible to move forward in a way that really impacts the inequality that we're seeing as we recover from the pandemic. So thank you.
Now stay up here with me for a little bit, Dr. Terriquez, because we're going to do a Q&A after each of the presentations while the information is fresh. But I'll kick us off. I personally, this is a passion area for me, civic engagement. And I really think that the issue to me is always that elections target high propensity voters. And our communities are often categorized as low propensity voters and also sit at the nexus of, they're in the hard to count census tracts. They're in the areas that are, have the highest crime rates, the income level. It's like this, the worst perfect storm, right? And so we know that there's a role for philanthropy, as you mentioned, that's supporting your research. And I know that personally as well. But what is the role for policymakers as it relates to really integrated civic engagement, inclusive of voter engagement?
Well, one of the things that may be surprising in a state like California is that we have to prevent the voter suppression. The voter suppression that continues to happen in some of the public schools where young people are not being allowed to register their peers. It's legal. You could do nonpartisan voting. Our nonpartisan voter registration education. And in some places where, CRT becomes contentious, like just talking about voting and your voting rights and the history of voting rights and the fact that women only have had the right to vote for 100 years or so. And we've had these disparate kind of ways in which we implement elections. That needs to be out there, because knowing that there has been an injustice motivates young people to actually go out and exercise their voice. So we need to make sure that the barriers to voting and voter education get lifted, especially in communities that have low turnout rates. There's a reason for that. There's a miseducation, disinformation that's happening. And so we can't, just because we're in California, doesn't mean we can't turn a blind eye to it. I mean, we see it in Santa Ana.
Yeah, absolutely, we
so-
do. Absolutely. And there we got our first Latino serving Board of Supervisor, Vicente Sarmiento, out of the movement that happened in Santa Ana, which we mobilized in that area as well. So, some progress. But I'd like to open it up to the room to see if you all have any questions for Dr. Terriquez. Or just any impressions. Yeah, please go ahead.
Does having either voting centers or places that make it easier to vote in areas where like Latino communities are more likely to congregate, so like at a church, at a community center, like are those ways we can increase voter participation?
There's some anecdotal evidence that does make a difference, and there's other people doing that research. But what's so important is that education. Why does it matter for my local congressperson, my local assembly person, state senator, city council person matter? Because understanding the significance of local elections and your local representatives is really motivating. So the education is critical, and it could have, like I'm seeing high school ethnic studies as one place to do this civic engagement work in a way that is inspiring to young people. Because knowing that your ancestors, people before you fought for that right, really helps people understand why it's so important to have a more equitable democracy.
Yeah, and if I may, we do this work at Ultimate, and so we actually utilize our clinics as central hubs for civic engagement. We have about 42 sites in LA and Orange County, and so we're going to where the community is. We are finding that if we offer voting and integrate voting, and like in the course of what someone's going to go and do anyway, and then it happens to be a trusted messenger like a doctor talking to the patient and telling them, hey, do you know that there's an election coming up? It makes all the difference in the world. And so, we're doing that. And last year we reached about 500,000 low propensity Latino voters. And this year and next year we're targeting about 1 million. But I think that the big thing on the policy solution, I think, is the continuous investment. There's no off years, and I think you all know that very well, right? You build one year and you can't let it go the second year. You got to keep on, and you got to keep on, and we got to meet our communities where they are.
The peer-to-peer education is so important because there's so much disinformation. Young people thinking that they cannot vote because their parents are not citizens is disinformation that they got from somewhere. And so there has to be a trusted person in the community, whether it's a medical professional or just another young person, just explaining the process. Because there's people who don't want them to vote, like for real. They don't want them
By
to
design.
vote.
It's by design, right? Yes, please.
You mentioned that there's been cases where high schools are suppressing students' ability to register students to vote. Is there like a list of those?
I could tell you some of them, but I could say they're in the places like the IE, Central Valley, Orange County, in places where it's Imperial Valley, where we see pretty low turnout among Latino youth. The voting rates are very disparate across counties. So you could look at the counties, like when you have only 8% of people voting in Imperial Valley and 30-something% in LA County, you know something's going on at the local level.
Right, absolutely. And so to close this out, I think that you have to look at untraditional, like non-traditional kind of entities in the community to be able to do this work, because clearly given the data, like we're going the wrong way. And so we really need to bring those community partners and resources to the table. So thank you for that. Oh, please go ahead.
Have you surveyed what are the drivers that are preventing young Latinos from voting? Just as much as you've surveyed, like, what are the drivers to get them to vote? What are the drivers that are not preventing them from voting?
Well, one of them is they feel like they don't have enough information. Like they don't want to make a bad decision. It's not wanting to make a bad decision or not understanding, like, what does it matter? Like we have this school board race, and I don't understand what it means to vote for my school board member. So it's a lot about voter education at the local level.
Agreed. Yeah. In this work, we get questions like, what's a Republican, what's a Democrat when we're knocking on doors, like in East LA, like in Santana. And so it's tough, right? And then you get to the trickier parts of the ballot, like the judges, for example. And we are all here, doing our research, right? Like, oh no, what judge? What is the person, right? So can you imagine, right? Like our parents, or if we've been disenfranchised this entire time. So,
But as you know, when you educate the young people, they educate their parents
yes, they do.
and their grandparents.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.